Welcome to another exciting episode of Present Truth. Today we have with us Tom Stapleton from Camp to Mead, and we want to talk about what's going on in the East, the events that has taken place over the last few weeks.
Right. Yeah, interesting things that are going on right now. Most people are watching and they don't really know how that affects us, everything that's going on with Iran and this latest assassination.
Yes.
So that's what you want to talk about.
Yes, sir. I'm sure that everyone's aware of what's going on in the East, and, we can only believe so much. A lot of the news that we get here in America isn't as truthful as we would like it to be, so I would like to know how we can determine if the news is real or if it's fake.
Right. Well, there is a lot of news coming out. It's just how do we sift through it? I think that's really the question. Mm-hmm. In regard to this event, I think we can believe that it's happened because both sides are recognizing that this Soleimani was assassinated along with a few other high officials. So there's no question about this actually happening. Now, how is that going to affect us? Depending on who you're listening to, you would sway one way or the other. If you're listening to the President of the United States, it would seem that he's got it all under control. But I think there's more to the story than that. What people aren't doing is they're not connecting it with biblical prophecy, and I think you wanted to get to that as a question. How does this fit into biblical prophecy? So the way that we can understand what news is correct is by what the prophecies say. And what I mean when I say that, if you know what the prophecies say, you know the end result. So any news is going to feed in, any true news is going to feed into that narrative, what the prophecy says. So the prophecies seem to indicate, and we're talking specifically Daniel 8 now, which most people don't understand that prophecy is for the time of the end. But we need to go reread that 3 times in the book of Daniel, chapter 8. It says that Daniel, this vision is for the end. It's talking about a war, and the area of the war is in the Middle East, exactly the same situation that we have now. So this is building up to a major war that the focal point will be in the Middle East. So any news that's coming out saying, oh, this is all just going to fade away and nothing's really going to happen, that's fake news. And it's not intentionally. I wouldn't say it's intentionally given. It's people want to hear good things, and so they want to hear that everything's going to settle down. The prophecy indicates that the United States will lead a war against the Middle East countries, which will involve all of Islam. And if it involves all of Islam, it's going to involve the whole world. Mm. So what would that look like? That would look like it indicates that all of Islam will join and square off. And most people say, well, that'll never happen. Well, it could happen. And that's what the prophecies seem to indicate will happen. So there's a few things that have to happen first. Number one, the nations of Islam have to join forces. They have to move towards more of a unified body, which is what they're planning. This is what Iran wants. This is what Turkey wants. This is what Syria wants. They want to join and work closer together, because the Islamic mandate actually is to rule the world. A lot of people don't really understand that, but that is their Quran mandate, that Allah will be supreme, and Sharia law everywhere. And this is what they believe. So this is what they're working towards. And I'm not saying that as a negative thing. Well, us in the West, that's not really what we want. But we also have a narrative that says that Christianity, so people that are Christians, believe that Yeshua will come back and reign and so on, and everything will be under his leadership. But it's not quite the same way as what Islam believes. Right. So they're working towards their ideology or their eschatology into what's going to happen. So we can expect where this will go. We can expect that Arab nations will unite. A country to watch is Turkey. What's Turkey doing? They've just extended their reach in the Mediterranean, and working with the Libyan government, they are now sending troops to Libya so that their preferred government will have power in Libya. So that will extend Turkey's reach all the way to Libya. So they'll have more influence in that side of the Mediterranean. So they will have that. They are also working carefully with Syria and also with Iraq and also with Iran. They're talking. And so what they would like to do is unify the Islamic nations, also reach into Malaysia and Indonesia. That's where the higher populations of the Muslims are. And they want to unify the Muslims. In fact, in a sense, they're isolating Saudi Arabia. So this is what we're looking at, is what is going on in Saudi Arabia, what is going on in the other countries. So their goal is to isolate Saudi Arabia so that Saudi Arabia will have to join forces with them.
Yeah.
How would that happen? It could happen two ways, two obvious ways. What we saw in Iran in 1979 with the Ayatollah Khomeini when he took over, it was like night and day. All of a sudden the U.S. was in there, just like they are with Saudi Arabia, and almost overnight, as it were, caught people off guard that they have these hostages and they've taken control of Iran, and everything changed since then. That can happen in Saudi Arabia. The princes, the ruling princes in Saudi Arabia fear that could happen. The stage is set for that to happen. The other thing that could happen is they could just surrender to Islam and be more friendly to, say, Iran and so on. But the way things are going in Saudi Arabia, I don't really think so. So as far as true news and fake news, the prophecies indicate that we're going to square off, and the West, led by the West, there will be a war with Islam. That's not me saying this. This is what the prophecies say. It says a power comes from the West. Let's just read that here. In Daniel 8:17, it says, "So he came near to where I stood." Now this is Gabriel. Gabriel came near to where Daniel stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, "Understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end." So you can read this in a lot of different translations as basically saying the same thing, as Daniel was shown a vision for the time of the end. Now this time of the end vision, it says, involves the kings of Media and Persia, and the king of Grecia too. This prophecy has been applied in history, but it looks pretty much like it's going to have an end time fulfillment involving these kings of Media and Persia. And I have a video on this, an extended video that goes through step by step and demonstrates how this is going to happen. But for the sake of just getting to the point, is what people need to consider is rereading this in a modern day setting, because this looks like it. Yeah. So Daniel's told once in this chapter in verse 17, and then 2 verses later, Gabriel knows that he didn't get it. So he comes to him again, and he says in verse 19, 2 verses later, and he said, "Look, I'm making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appointed time the end shall be." So second time he says, this is the end, Daniel. Daniel was trying to sort this out, what it all meant. And Gabriel's basically saying, look, Daniel, you're not going to figure this out. I'm just giving you this vision. Write it down. It's not for you. Then at the end, he says, the vision of the evenings and mornings which was told is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. And that's like saying it's way down in the future. So 3 times within the same chapter, he says this vision is for the end. Now, I just want to skip up to Daniel chapter 12. And a lot of people, they're not studying these books, so they don't really know exactly what it's saying. But in Daniel chapter 12, same thing, Gabriel's present. Actually, Yeshua is present in this chapter as well. In verse 4, it says, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book." not the chapter, but the book. So Daniel's told again to shut up and seal the book. Exactly the same thing that he was told in Daniel chapter 8. So Daniel chapter 8 was going to be sealed until the time of the end. Keep it secret, it says. Now he's told again in Daniel chapter 12 to seal it up. And then he goes on to say, until the time of the end. So this sealing or locking up is going to be sealed until the time of the end. So now we have to figure out, well, when's the time of the end?
Right.
Well, I'd say we're knocking on the door.
Yes.
So we should expect these prophecies to be understood. In fact, I would say, I'd be as bold to say this, is that any attempt to unseal the prophecies before the time is going to have error in it. So,
Absolutely.
so if somebody believes something 100 years ago or 200 years ago about these prophecies, there's a good chance there may be some error in it. Because God's word says it will be sealed until the time of the end. Now, just in case Daniel didn't get that, again, he's told in verse 9, he says, and he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. And it talks about the book. So really the understanding of the whole book of Daniel, and I'm talking from chapter 1 through 12, is sealed. The meanings of those things are sealed. Now, an example, well, just the first 6 chapters about Daniel's life in Babylon. Well, there's some things in those first 6 chapters that have to do with the time of the end. We see in chapter 3 that there's an image made to the king. Well, we can see in Revelation chapter 13, there's an image to a beast. So you see the similarities all the way through. There's the lessons all the way through the book of Daniel that won't really be understood. So these visions, we have to understand that they are for our time.
Yes, sir.
So they're talking, they both begin with war, Daniel 8 and Daniel 10 through 12. Both those visions begin with war with the kings of Media and Persia. So that's what we're looking at. And when we look at the kings of Media and Persia in Daniel's day at the height of their empire, they encompassed the whole of the Middle East. So God is saying that Western powers will square off against the kings of Media and Persia, which will involve all of Islam. So back to your question about the fake news, just to recap on that. So any news that detracts from that end, a world war against Islam, is going to be fake news, because we know that God's word will have its way.
Right.
And so it's telling us what's going to happen. So I basically discard anything that doesn't go along with what God's word, and then I can tell that that's real news. So when I look at these Islamic nations that are now talking together and making alliances and things like that, I know that that's the direction
Correct.
that it's going on.
Right. And we had, my second question was going to be, how can we relate the prophecy in the book of Daniel to the events that are happening today? And you touched base here with the scripture. So I just wanted to make sure that we gave enough examples of prophecy that supported the events that are taking place in the East.
Right. And here again, I would like to refer people to the more lengthy teaching. I think it's about an hour and a half or something. It's called Prophecy Update on our website. Right. That's going to go through the prophecy in detail and demonstrate that this is actually for now. So that we couldn't do that. All I'm saying is look.
Correct.
Look. We're seeing prophecy being fulfilled right before our very eyes. Most people are totally unaware of it. I was with some people yesterday, and one of the comments that came back was, nobody's studying these prophecies like this. Nobody's even reading them. So if you were the enemy, you would want to do that, is don't read the prophecies that have to do with what's going on right now. And so he's really detracted from these prophecies for what's going on.
Well, Tom, with the news that's going on today, there's probably a lot of misunderstanding that America jumped the gun and we did something wrong. But I don't think that we totally understand everything that has been going on for at least the last few weeks with the start of the contractors.
Right.
So would you mind explaining, maybe give us a little bit of detail of how we led up to this point?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There's just the last recent events. One thing that people don't understand is I've talked to some people and they don't really understand the history that led us up to here. This history is actually a 4,000-year-old history, is what people don't understand. It's a conflict between the sons of Abraham. So
Right.
the stem from Ishmael and Isaac. So that's really the starting point. So, but we're going to fast forward. So we saw that conflict and a division. The division is been getting wider, has been getting wider. So in 1979, fast forward to 1979, you saw Iran totally take a different outlook. It was called the Islamic Awakening. That's what happened, and that's where it all started. The Arab Spring that we've seen the last 5-6 years, that really started in 1979. And what that demonstrated is the Islamic nations can actually stand on their own, and they don't need the West. That's where they were going. And their teachings are that we're all a bunch of infidels, which is really what they teach. Some of them are God seekers, and it's their job to find out who they are so that they can serve Allah and adopt their lifestyle and so on. So that's their mission. So that's what happened in 1979, this Islamic awakening, and it started to spread. It's been spreading very slow. Well, it sped up in the Arab Spring. Some of these countries got rid of these dictators. Happened in Egypt. And now Egypt's sort of under control again, but it's still happening throughout the Gulf region. They're not sure whose side they're on. So it came that Iran has become the target because they're the ones that are feeding into this narrative. And that's why it's always been against Iran, because they're first and foremost to spread their ideology, and that's Islam. It's for the good of Islam is what they're proclaiming. And I understand why they're doing that. From their perspective, they're doing what they should be doing. So they're doing this. So the United States is fully aware of this, and that's why they've tried to contain Iran. Well, it's in 2003 when George Bush went in and took out Saddam Hussein. That in a small way was not a good idea. They wanted to set up a democratic system in Iraq. 2/3 of the population are Shia, which are more Iranian influence. And so that sort of built a bit of a bridge, and Iran has been the beneficiary of that ever since. So they've been slowly becoming more friendly to Iraq since Saddam Hussein has been gone. And now with ISIS and so on, the United States was helping Iraq fight ISIS. But we didn't really know this because it's not advertised per se, is that Iran was actually in there fighting ISIS as well. So in different places, they're not shoulder to shoulder with the United States forces, but there were these Shia militias that were fighting ISIS and containing ISIS. And this Soleimani was the one that was guiding all of those workings. So he was in Iraq working with these militia groups that were tied to the Iraqi government. So this is a problem for the United States that he's in there working. Well, Iraq was not impressed when all of this came down. It started about 3 weeks ago. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but it started about 3 weeks ago when these Shia militias now, which are backed by the government in Iraq, they want the United States gone. So they had some rockets fall on a place, and it killed a contractor. Now, this is a military contractor, U.S. military contractor, and there was a few other people that were injured. So that was kind of the beginning about 3 weeks ago. And so what then the United States did is they went in and they killed about 25 of these militias in an attack, a rocket attack. Well, then that brought on the demonstration at the embassy when they breached actually the first wall of the embassy. They call it a green zone. So if you hear that term green zone, that's the zone inside the embassy, but not inside the embassy proper.
Correct.
And the way I understand it, that the United States, when they built that embassy, they built it more like a fortress than they did an embassy,
Yeah.
because they were not going to have what happened in Iraq or in Iran. Same thing happened. Same thing happened in Libya with the overtaking of the embassy there and the ambassador there being killed. So they wanted to have a lot of precaution there. So they built this fortress inside of Iraq. Well, they stormed the embassy last week, and a lot of damage. I don't know what the cost is, but a lot of damage. And they kind of had their way with the outer court, so to speak, the green zone. And then the United States says, well, we're going to retaliate. And Iran did something. Have you ever been tempted in your life to do something wrong?
Yes.
Well, Donald Trump was saying that he can control this thing and so on, that he was going to do certain things. And the supreme leader in Iran, at least this is the news that came across, which is probably in line with what he was saying, he said there's not a damn thing that you can do. And so what they did was a precision, almost, I would say, surgical takeout of Soleimani and one of the militia, the Shia militia leaders, because these guys come and go as they please in Iraq because they're working with the Iraqi government.
Right.
Well, the problem with that is that they didn't tell the Iraqi government that they were going to do this. And that has raised the ire of the Iraqi government, because they are saying that this now is an attack on the sovereignty of Iraq. You can't go into a country and take somebody out with that country without them knowing. Right. So they're very upset. And some of the things that I was reading this morning was even the Iraqi parliament is now, some of them are saying the United States has to leave. We cannot have this because this is an attack on our sovereignty. And Iran is saying the same thing. They are saying exactly the same thing. They are very upset. This general, Soleimani, he's probably had more influence on what's been going on in the Middle East for the last 20 years than any other figure. We don't really understand this. But this was a very, very important person that they just took out. Now, Iran is saying that they're gonna respond. So what we're looking at here, how does this relate to what's going to happen in the future? Their response is going to determine, and they're making all kinds of claims. They've got targets, and they're very capable. They're not, I don't believe, capable of defeating the United States, but they're capable of making a mess, and that's what we don't understand. This could get a lot worse before it gets better. But this is actually what I call a hitting the fast forward button on the war that's coming. This is just sped things up. Right. What it's doing, it's alienating the United States, now with even the Iraqi parliament, because they're upset. Erdogan from Turkey is upset, and these people are all in communication with each other. Qatar and some of these other countries, I rather suspect Malaysia is going to have something to say about this. But even the UN, some people that are high up in the UN are saying that this was an illegal act. You cannot assassinate somebody like this. And so there's going to be some problems on the world stage that come of this, that's not actually going to put the United States in a good light.
Right.
And with the rest of the world.
Right. Well, I don't think that we could have told them that we were going to be in their country about to assassinate someone without,
No.
They would have probably.
It's not possible. If they were going to do this, there's no way they could have told. And I
Right.
understand they didn't even brief their greatest ally, Great Britain, that they were going to do this. And Great Britain was a little upset because they've got their soldiers in that
Right.
area, so they're vulnerable now too, because they treat the United States and Great Britain the same over in those countries. They're
Right.
both the enemy, so to
Yes, sir.
speak. And Canada is the same way. Is they have troops in there that are training in Iraq too, and they're not really impressed with what was going on because they weren't briefed, I understand, either.
Right.
But you're right, they couldn't, because it would get out and they wouldn't be able to pull it off. Now, who's to say what they did was absolutely the best possible option that they had? They've done it. It's behind us. Where do we go from here, really?
Well, I have another question to ask you, Tom. As an individual believer, how does this affect our lives today? I mean, what can we look forward to or expect, or should we just sit still?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm gonna ask another question to our viewers. If this is actually what's recorded in the prophecies, then I have to ask a question: why did God have it recorded? Was it just to scare us? I don't think so, because everything that God does is for our best interest, which sometimes we don't really get that. So, so the prophetic gift that he's given the prophets to write these things down, to write them down carefully, just what we just read there, write it down. It's not going to be understood until the time of the end. So whatever the purpose is of these prophecies, I can know for sure it's for our best interest that we know them. That's why he had it recorded. So why is it in our best interest? If we understand the magnitude of this war that's coming, it's not going to be a war that's fought on somebody else's soil. It's actually going to come home. So how's it going to come home? Is Iran going to invade the United States? No, Iran's not going to invade the United States. But there's a lot of Muslims, even here in North America, that are a little upset with what just happened. And it could very well be that there are terrorist cells, which we're very familiar with in the past. They've happened. You know, if you don't learn the lessons of the past, you're going to repeat it, right? So we know what they're capable of doing. So if Islam unites the way the prophecies indicate, then that's going to be a worldwide uniting of Islam and Muslims. So if even a portion of the Muslims here that are in North America unite and quotes as jihad against the West or even the world at that point, then we will see things happen on our soil in the form of terrorist activities. And there's any number of things that they can do. And I think some of those would be a little scary in that they could involve biological, chemical weapons, even small nuclear devices, which they have those capabilities. So these are things that we should be aware of. What can we do? Well, some people, when you talk about nuclear war, they'd want to be right underneath the bomb when it drops so they don't have to worry about a thing. But it's not going to be like that. It's going to be, if it's a biological weapon, there could be diseases, which is what it says. There will be pestilence and starvation and things like that. So maybe we'd want to be, in my thinking, I might want to live further from a large population center, because this is where the attacks are going to be. They're going to be power distribution centers, fuel places,
Hospital.
Yeah, hospitals, things like this. So you might want to be away from that. So it might be an idea to think about, where would I go if something big happened? And I think people should start thinking along those terms. Maybe think about moving out of the city. Maybe think about growing your own food. Get into a position where if something radical happened here in the United States or in Canada, you would be able to sustain yourself. If the power was cut off, what would you do? If they hit a power station and power was cut off for a month in the middle of the winter, what would you do?
Right.
Would you have the power to heat your home? Would you have wood to heat your home? How would you heat your home? Because it's things like that that are going to happen. Yeshua said, one thing that people miss. He said there's going to be a time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation. And men's hearts will fail for fear. That's heart attack.
You're right.
They're going to
Yeah.
fail for fear of what's coming. So I think he's told us that so we can be prepared for it. Now, there's different things, and this is sort of a sideline issue, but there's different theologies that are coming out because of this fear factor, sort of. The rapture. Have you ever heard of the rapture?
Yes.
So if I believe there's a rapture and I'm just going to be taken out, then I don't need to worry about any of this stuff
Right.
anyway. So really, why did it even get written? So no, I don't believe that the rapture is going to take us out and put us somewhere else so that we don't have to worry about anything. I believe that God has shown us these things so that we can be prepared for when it happens. Solomon tells us, a wise man foresees evil coming and he hides himself. And so we can do, to a degree, we can shelter ourselves.
Let me clarify. I don't want to get off track here, but the rapture, so that our viewers out there don't think that you and I are condoning this rapture, there is no rapture.
Well, the word rapture is not in the Bible. So it's a word that we've sort of brought into the Bible narrative. And there's a few verses here and there that would suggest that God's going to protect his people in this
Right.
time. And he's going to have to protect them. But
Correct.
the question is, how is he going to protect them?
Right.
You know, it says that the woman flees into the wilderness where she has a place prepared. So that's a protection. But there's, you know, you got to get your boots on and do up the laces in order to flee, right? So
Correct.
there's things that we need to do. It's not just going to be, you know, God just lifts us up and takes us away. So in
Right.
that sense, I don't believe there's a rapture. But if we want to talk about a rapture, when Yeshua actually returns and he raises the dead, as Paul says,
Correct.
those that are alive and caught up together with him in the air to meet the Lord in the air. To me, that's
right.
we could use that term there,
Yes.
but that's where it would have a rightful place. But that's not talking about the time of trouble. During that time of trouble, they're not going to be taken out before that time.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been good to be here and talk about these things. I know there's a lot of people out there that really don't know and they can't put these pieces together. But we just want to say that watch. We're told in the Bible to watch. Yeshua said when you see all these things, he's talking about news. He's talking about world events. That's what he's talking about. And we just like to say is we need to be watching. We need to be awake. And once we start studying these prophecies, we can see that we're getting very close to the end. And we
Right.
need to be aware of that and do what we can. Yeshua said, as in the days of Noah. And so often we think of what we're talking about is just the wickedness in the world. And yeah, that's part of it. But Noah was told to build a boat so he could ride out the storm. That's an obvious thing that was
Right,
going
yes.
on. So I believe we can take that also from Noah, that little lesson from Noah. And Yeshua's warned us of the storm that's coming, unlike any other time of trouble. He's warning us to take shelter, so to do what we can to take shelter. Another thing that Noah did, which people don't really think about, he was told to take enough food into the ark so he would have food for the animals and so on. So as in the days of Noah goes further than just the wickedness of man. And so there's lots of lessons we can learn, and I believe God is calling us to prepare for this time that's coming. And so we have lots more information on our website for people that are wondering how they can prepare. What we're doing in Canada, we have a video on our website and on YouTube, a tour of Camp Tamid. What we're doing to prepare, we're planting gardens, we're putting fruit trees in, and so on. I don't believe that Yeshua is coming back next week or even next year.
Right.
We've got a little bit of time. We've got a few things that are going to be played out in prophecy, but it's certainly time to start preparing for that. And we have a video that shows what we're doing up there. If you want to have a look at that, our viewers have a look at that, I would really encourage it. I've talked to a lot of people. We were just at a seminar a couple of weeks ago, and there are many people thinking of getting out of the city for what they see.
Right.
And once we understand these prophecies, we've got some real reasons to think about preparing in some way, shape, or form. We also have a book called The Wise Shall Understand Daniel and Revelation. I really encourage people to go on our website and they can download that, an e-book, or order the book themselves. We've got people reading that all over the place, ordering like 10, 20 copies so that they can hand them
Right.
out. It has information that we need. Does it have all truth in it? Well, I'm believing that we're on the track of truth, and we've got some things in here. I've got a copy of it here. The wise shall understand, and I really recommend that people get a hold of this book and start reading it, because it shows, you know, this was written, finished 2 years ago, and it makes the news today come alive. It's absolutely in line with everything that we're seeing.
Correct.
And it shows how it's all going to be playing out. It takes us right up until the second coming. So we also have a video called The 8 Prophetic Events That Lead Up to the Second Coming. And that goes along with this book as well. So if you're not a prolific reader, have a look at that video and also the prophecy update. Yeah.
I can attest to the book, Tom. I've read the book, and I find it very interesting, very easy to read. It's scripture supported. You can find all the scripture in the book of Daniel and Revelation and how they parallel one another. You can't have one without the other. But again, I'd like to thank you, Tom, for today and our presentation.
Good to be here. Thanks.